So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and we're going to talk about co-op game play and how co-op doesn't necessarily mean goals that are aligned, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that you're opposed to each other. This year will have been married for 10 years. The theorists still don't know how that's possible. But I think that one of the things my wife and I have is overall, we have the same goals, but there are plenty of things in between that we like to do differently and that we approach differently. And there are times where we have to have a discussion about how those, although our main goals align, some of the smaller things day to day we want to see done differently. And I think, I guess what I'm pointing out is that 10 years of proof that it can be done productively is kind of the point, which is, for me in a tabletop game, some of the most cool, meaningful moments are when characters grow, and some of the only ways to truly grow is to flex and be stretched. And the way that you stretch characters is to force them to go outside of their comfort zone or test their beliefs and those kinds of things. And so, yeah. So how do you do it, though, in a game without it becoming dangerous or without it becoming tired?
I think that there are a million ways to come at that question. But I think
do everyone
bringing up
do them all.
Every single one in a row. All right,
I'm
list
in.
them. Okay, guys, every answer to this question ranked.
I'm living for this. You'll never believe number 400,737.
No, but in all jokiness, no. Sorry, you got me, and I totally forgot where I was. Oh yeah, okay. So I think that you brought up a really good example there, Tim, of the idea of your relationship with your wife, right? Because that's something that whether someone else is married or not, they can understand that when you work with another person in real life at anything. Most of you probably have coworkers or students you'd have to work with, like people you had to work with on something. You have, right? Or you get divorced, you get an F on your test, you're not friends with that person anymore. It's important to bring that part of it to the game with you. Obviously, it depends on a million things outside of the game, in a sense where if you're 4 random people that met up for this session to happen, don't start with inter-party conflict, because at that stage, there's no reason one of you wouldn't walk away. So it's the sort of thing where there are like a bunch of little caveats. To me, it's an extremely advanced thing to do in the game, because your goal should be to play a character that's more real. And when conflict arises, treat that conflict like it's with somebody you know. So it's not that the goal is to go, well, see what the other person wants and do the opposite, because that's fun. And obviously, I don't feel that we're suggesting that at any point. But the idea is, you in the quick tips, Tim, you use the example of the Maltese Falcon. 2 people that in the party that want to steal the same thing for different purposes. That has to get resolved. Maybe one can convince the other, maybe not. But the important thing is, like you said in the quick tips, Jeff, the expectation is that you have a level of respect for each other, especially at the end of this long campaign, that you're going to figure it out. It might not feel great. Maybe you will buy it off the other person. Literally, it's an RPG. You can do whatever you want, but you have to solve this problem. So it is the sort of thing where, so Tim, when you say, how do you do that not dangerously? The number one tip to make sure it doesn't blow up in your face is don't do it with the goal of getting a rise out of another player or specifically doing it against them. You have full agency over your own player, and just the same, someone else has full agency over theirs. It's a bad idea to start picking fights. But if you go into it knowing, okay, we're all on the same page, we're all buds, we slept in the same place, you watched over me while I slept and could have died, I think we can figure out what we're going to do with this item, And it, like you said, will make for a good role play moment where everybody gets to grow and you talk about it later instead of, well, he rolled high enough, so sorry, he stole the Maltese Falcon out of your bag while you weren't paying attention.
Yeah, and I think the important part of the process that I think gets left off in this conversation about inter-party conflict is that for it to really land in the way that it should in the game, the conflict has to be followed by a resolution of some sort. And I think that's where people sometimes get mixed up, is they're like, oh, I want some inter-party conflict. Let me put two people in the party at such fundamental ideological odds that they'll never be able to agree on anything. It's like, well, that'll add conflict, but the conflict will get stale very quickly, and it will just cause problems because there's no way to then move that conflict into growth. Like, there's no point where we can be like, oh, okay, actually, let's move past this and get forward. Of like, in a situation where two people are trying to steal the same thing, it's like one person can probably convince the other one of like, even if it's like, hey, look, let me have this one and the next one is for you. When we have this conversation again in the next dungeon, you get the thing. Or like, hey, actually, like, I need this because if I don't get this, I won't be able to get the money that I need for my family and they're going to go hungry. You just want it for you. Like, why can't we figure something out? That there's, in that instance, there's a point where we can say, okay, we have to figure something out. Let's come to this course of action. And that will, even if it doesn't necessarily make everybody happy in character, we can at least end the conflict and move on. And maybe that conflict then comes up later of like, last time you did this and you were so selfish, and it can boil up again at a different point and be a new conflict. But in this instance, there's a beginning and an end point to the scenario. And I think that is very important in this sort of conflict, is like, if you're going to do it right, it needs to have a point where it can stop, where it's not going to be at every single instance throughout the entire game, beginning to end. There's always a problem between these two people for this reason. Like, and again, it's something that borrows a lot from movies. Of like, so many movies will have that, like, at the beginning they hate each other and by the end they're best friends, sort of thing. And there's usually some sort of turning point where they can find out that, oh, actually we weren't as different as we thought. Or no, I judged you wrong because of this misconception I had from my past, or whatever. And that point needs to happen, in a game where you're going to have party conflict. And I think that's something that I think sometimes gets lost in the shuffle of like, the good inter-party conflict isn't just, I hate this person and I'll never like them. Like, that's not interesting or fun. And it doesn't provide any like options for choices. Like, anytime you interact with them, it'll just be, I hate you, you hate me. Where you want there to be choices that can be made and resolutions that can happen, and a way for people to discover new things about each other and move forward.
Yeah, and I think one of my concerns when we started talking about this topic is that people were going to say, oh, now I have to do this in my games. But I have had a change of mind on that, because the more I think about it, the more this is equipping people for when it will likely occur naturally. As we create our characters, we have a backstory, and we have a class and a race and all these different things. And that at some point, those things you've chosen about your character will be opposed to what someone else chose about their character, totally separate from you. So this is actually, I'm realizing, I'm like, actually, this will come up and has come up in games I've been in without being planned. So this is kind of encouragement to say, lean into it. So when you specifically have, and Jeff, I think that was a really good point of, don't make it immutably unsolvable. But in most games, the character options and the backstory stuff would never be that way. Unless you really pushed into it, like you said, and said, no, I'm creating a paladin of lawful good, that was opposed to someone who was creating a demon worshiper of chaotic evil or whatever. But in many cases, it's a matter of just culture, opinion, family, the things that we deal with in our regular real lives, just in a character. So when your dwarven, paladin or your dwarven cleric is faced with the rogue who maybe is not following the specific tenets as laid out because they are a totally separate person, they don't care about what's important to the cleric because they have their own set of problems. They're trying to steal this Maltese Falcon from this vault. Lean into that. And it's okay if this comes up to have a discussion about it openly. And I guess that's what I kind of came to the conclusion of, is that in my head it was something you were going to bake in from session 0, but when it inevitably comes up, it's okay to say, hey, this is actually kind of an interesting opportunity for some inter-party conflict. My dwarf wouldn't really be okay with anyone stealing this. Can we at least talk that through? Because maybe you could figure out a way that it does make sense for the dwarf because of X and Y and Z, but at least bringing it up and talking about it. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I was like, that's a turning point I had. This is going to happen. This is going to come up very likely. Lean into it and use it as a storytelling tool.
And I didn't really think of it that way, Tim. When you said it's going to come up, and it's something that I knew but didn't realize was important to voice, because it is going to come up. A good example of this that is like it affected every player in the game is when we were playing in a game you were running, Tim, where basically one of my fellow players said, oh, I was on this side of this very popular war that ended that was very polarizing. And it made me think immediately, oh, which side was my character on? The thing is, it didn't come up, but I made a decision. Okay, well, that's going to come up, this big thing in the world. I don't think as a GM, you could have planned that or that it's worth it. And that is an entirely different conversation. But you did anyway. Like you said, it's going to happen. So it is a separate thing. Try not to force that. But it is the sort of thing where because it's real life, there's going to be conflict, right? Like that's how it works. What you said, Jeff, the interesting part is basically what you were saying was make sure there's an arc to it, right? Make sure you don't stop at the top and go, all right, well, we hate each other. That's it. You need that, what is it? Denouncement without an NC, a denouement. You need that falling action of, okay, we've talked about it. And even if the scene ends there with, well, we're still mad at each other, right? Like how many times have you walked away from a fight with your brother or sister and been like, well, that didn't help anything. But then you think about it and it weighs on you. And similar to what Jeff brought up earlier, it comes up again. You know, it needs to eventually resolve, but resolve doesn't mean everybody's happy. Because in the case of two people fighting over the same thing to sell, somebody else could step in and go, no, that belongs to me. And maybe that's a little bit of an overreach for like, oh, these two people, you know, you would have to do that right. But it's the sort of thing where, well, they didn't know that. You know what I mean? How do you solve this problem? We have infinite ability, because we do it every day, to solve issues. You can do it in character. And it is a little bit like you get to tell your own story, even though everybody's collaboratively telling a story, in the sense that my character in those that remain Dragongrin game that we were playing, I don't know a lot about my character. And a lot of the fun is getting the chance to build my character, and that game does that a lot. I don't get to roll as many dice as I have in other games, but that doesn't matter because this is where the fun is in this game for me, you know? So I think that it coming up naturally is very important, and it's just a good idea to have preferences for your character. And then when one of them is you know, sort of butted up against, maybe they only serve a specific type of alcohol here. You like whiskey, but they only serve vodka. You get a character moment. It's just that with another person, you know? So yeah, I think that it's just something that can make the game a lot more interesting, and it's going to happen anyway. So some tools to be able to face it when it does, I think are important.
Yeah, and speaking of tools to face it when it does happen, I think something that's, often discounted and sort of ignored that is very, very, very valuable is like when it comes, especially to character conflict, in general, it's okay. But especially when it comes to character conflict, it's totally okay to get meta with it and to have conversations person to person about what this conflict is doing for the game and like how, not necessarily like, okay, let's resolve it. So next game, you say this, and then I'll say this, and then we'll do. And it's like it doesn't have to be like that, but just like I've had, you know, moments in games where like things will get like really, really tense between two characters in game, where it seemed like, oh, geez, we might not have an escape, you know, button on this one. What are we gonna do? And once that session ended, we got in the group chat, and I said like, hey, you know, something needs to happen here. Like this is starting to bubble up a little bit into like, I as a player, I'm not necessarily totally cool with the way that like this is making me enjoy the game less, not more. Can we find a way to wrap it up or let it play out under the surface or like find something that we can do with this other than play it out how it is right now, because like this isn't fun for me. This is actually kind of stressing me out. I don't really know where this is going. And like I'm worried that the game's going to get messed up because of this, and I don't want that to happen. Like, what can we do? Like, we just straight up have that conversation as a party, out of character, no in character, not even during the game. Just like, okay, this conflict has gotten a little out of hand. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? It's okay to do that. It's okay to go to the other person and say like, hey, our characters were fighting here. I just wanted to make sure, like, we had the big argument over who was going to get this thing in character. I just wanted to make sure that was characters fighting, and that you as the player are happy with the way that this is playing out, that it's not causing you problems with me. Like, just, we're cool, right? Yes. Okay. We are okay. Then we can keep doing that in the game and we're okay. But sometimes it might be like, actually, no, like, I feel like I was made it pretty clear that my character had this thing that they were trying to accomplish. And it kind of feels like you're just antagonizing me just to get a rise. Like, oh no, that's not what I meant. Like, it's okay when it comes to character conflict to have that conversation away from the characters and say like, hey, are you okay with what's happening? You know, if it doesn't get better, what's our escape hatch? What compromise can we find? Like, we need to make sure this game continues. Like, how can we do that? And I don't think enough people necessarily do that part of the legwork too when it comes to conflict, of like, it's okay to check in with each other and be like, hey, that got pretty heated. How are you doing? Are we cool? I just want you to know we're cool. I like you in real life still. Nothing personal. We're all good. Like, you know, that sometimes when games get really heated, that sort of confirmation, you know, and check-in can be really valuable. So don't be afraid to do that, and just really confirm with the party that like, this is drama in the story, not arguments at the table, you know, and it's okay just to make sure and ask. And if it is an actual problem, then you can take steps as people to resolve the conflict as people rather than as characters in the game. And that can sometimes get to the heart of things a lot quicker.
Yeah, and I was trying to think like, and I think I thought of one because I was trying to think of a very well-known, clear example of how this can make the story better. And there'll be light spoilers for a movie that's like 3 years old now, which is Avengers Infinity War. So not Endgame, but Infinity War, which is basically there's a scene where there's a very popular character, Iron Man, and there's a very popular character, Doctor Strange, and they're fighting over what to do with this really powerful artifact known as an Infinity Gem or an Infinity Stone. And Doctor Strange is basically saying, hey, I have to protect this, so we need to do X. And Iron Man is saying, well, if we do X, then we will lose, so we need to do Y. And it's a really good example. In fact, it's the driving it's the driving conflict of the film that moves it forward, is them deciding what to do and how it's going to play out. And that whole scene, I am thinking of it now. I love it. I loved the way it took the movie. I love the way that the characters resolved it. I love how it was one of the most powerful character moments. And that's the part I won't actually tell you how it played out, but Doctor Strange decided one thing. Iron Man or Tony Stark decided another. They worked together with a compromise of, fine, then these are the conditions. And it made for arguably the most powerful moment in the movie, and then the biggest payoff in the sequel. And it's like, so there's your example right there, that is the way to make it work. Because at no point did the story stop moving forward. At no point did they get so far at odds, Jeff, like you're saying, that it was an impassable object. And so maybe the takeaway here is, don't be afraid of compromises, actual compromises with conditions that are clearly stated. Okay, well, we can do this with the Infinity Stone, but this is what that means. Fine, and then this is what that means. Okay. Because it can come, back around and make some really, really cool payoffs. It's like, now I'm totally sold on this, and I'm like, yep, it's a must.
I'm actually almost a little sad I didn't tie it so much more to the idea that you can see this in every movie and television show you've ever watched. any characters that want something different. That's what you know what I mean? Like sometimes they hate each other, but especially in cases where they like each other, like you said, the Avengers. It's the kind of thing where I'm like, no, two very smart people that have completely different opinions of how to go forward. That doesn't mean the story stops. The world is happening to them, so they need to figure something out, right? So if your players are arguing over the Maltese Falcon in the vault too long, well, of course a guard shows up because you don't get to do that. You were too loud.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, so I think that's a really interesting concept. Is it's extra story. You're sprinkling it right on there. I'm like, don't mistake inter-party conflict with getting what you want for your character. Those are different,
So in the comments, that would be a great thing in a book, in a film, in a TV show, in a music video, whatever medium you choose. What is an example of characters who have inter-party conflict or conflicting goals? And just like show us some classics. That would be great. And we are Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop games. If you like those things, consider subscribing because we have a pair of videos come out every single week. We will end this with a Tabtarian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte.
Denouement.
So I played in a game. I'll take the names out to protect the involved. But I actually played in a game where the conflict got so bad that we had to stop the game and talk about it as players because it got very, very intense. Of like one of the players was playing someone who's like very, very ideologically firm in their stance of like, this is what we need to do and this is why, and like these are lines that cannot be crossed. And one of the other people in the game crossed one of those lines in a heated moment of like, it was understandable how they could like in the moment do that. And they were like immediately, regretful of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake, especially to you, the person who's like very concerned about this. But like in game, in character, it was like, oh geez, like, no, this is potentially like game over level of like, I'm mad at you, I'm not dealing with you sort of thing. And we stopped the game and we actually had a conversation of like, okay, so that got a little more intense than we thought it might. Let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation here and make sure that we're all good. And one of the people in the game actually specifically said like, I know this drama is really juicy in character, but it's making me actually anxious, like me in real life, about what's going to happen with this game. Can we find a way around that? Please, like for my sake as a person, like even if it's like, oh, it doesn't make sense in character, like I don't care. Please, we need to deal with this. So we had a conversation out of character and we found a way to make it work and continue the game. And it took some compromises both in and out of character to make the game continue. But like that conversation saved that game, which might have imploded on itself if we didn't have that pause moment.